Beazley breach response is one of the solutions that's out there in the data breach world. And we were talking about it earlier. It is a great solution, I think, for many entities, companies, organizations, public entities even. But it's not for all. And so that's where the flexibility, the creativity comes in, because we hope that if that particular solution is not one for you, that we can come up with another that's maybe more of a traditional risk transfer model, or ultimately maybe there's a better fit out there in the insurance marketplace that Michael is aware of. And so we certainly recognize that, and I hope that you hear that message from me straight away. So part of what we'll talk about here and what makes us different, hopefully it at least gets the thought pattern going in your heads of what you might want, what you might need should you consider risk transfer. So Beazley breach response, what makes it different? Michael covered the high level there. It's a solution in my mind that brings together an indemnity policy for all of the different coverages that Michael was talking about, and then it adds in a service component that is backed by the group that Alex is a part of, the breach response services. And this came out of a need. What do all great products that are out there, consumer products that we buy that we want? We want a phone that can do everything. I can watch a video, I can watch a movie. Oh my gosh, what's next? I don't know. Somebody's thinking of that. What I'm trying to think about every day is what you all might need with respect to insurance in this. So in 2009, I can't take credit for this. I actually give it all to my boss, who was there at the time, or our boss, and our head of claims, who were working together with some of our insureds who were experiencing these data breaches. And our claims manager, she came to our boss Mike and said, gosh, we may have something here, because I'm noticing that many of our insureds will call us and say, okay, we have this policy and it says that you're going to reimburse us, and that's great, but what do we do? Like, who do we call? Is there an Alex out there that we can call? And at the time, Alex was one of those people that we could call to say, can you do an investigation? Wait, but don't we need a privacy attorney? How do we know about all these laws and everything like that? So they started realizing that part of that leverage resource that Alex was talking about sits actually within the insurance industry. And it doesn't just sit within Beazley, it does sit within our competitors, I'll tell you that. But we just happened to come up with a solution that would work, and Mike and Beth really did that. And so they came up with this service component that would help aggregate all of the information that we would have on the people that you would call when you need the help. It would qualify them ahead of time so that you knew that you weren't going to be either, one, working with someone who was unaware of what they were doing or were bad at what they do, and two, the part of that is that if they're unaware of what they're doing, you end up paying them to learn. Well, that doesn't sound fair. If they're an expert, they should already know what they're doing, and you shouldn't have to pay them for those hours. So the little things like that. And then you start to work with the notification firms, the call centers, start to talk to the credit monitoring companies, you start to talk to the identity monitoring companies over time. You have people like Alex, who was going through a move at the time and some other personal things that were going on around his identity. You have him sign up and do a cold test case. See how it goes. See who raises a flag because he moved to New Jersey rather than living in New York. One caught it, one didn't. It was kind of an interesting live test case. These are the things that we're doing. We're sitting there kind of like mad scientists in London and in San Francisco and in New York, and trying to cobble together these solutions that hopefully we refine them well enough so that they work very well. But that's really the basis of it. And I think Alex is going to jump in here on part of it. The only thing I'd say is that part of where we're trying to go with this product, and where I ask you in terms of what you need and what you would want with the products that are out there, solution, product's a bad word, solution, is that when we brought Alex on board, my introduction for Alex usually goes something like this. We hired him away from Kroll, which was a coup in the data breach marketplace, because Alex was at Kroll managing 250 data breaches over his career there, stemming from one person involved to 30 million people involved. And we said to Alex, we want you to come on board, but Beth's team at the time, and then soon to be created, the breach response services team, they're going to be a bunch of people who are managing the breaches. We don't want you to do that. We want you to come in, leverage your knowledge and your experience to convert that to the front end, because what we need in the future is something on the front end to go talk to our clients about in the way of best practices so that they're prepared. They've prepared the funeral in advance. They're ready to go when that breach takes place because our overall experience will be better. Now I'll let you break in.
No. I wanted to point out just a few elements that was just mentioned. So first off, Max appropriately described, the last thing you want to do is you going out to find that privacy attorney or that forensics firm on your own. The reason being, as you can imagine, as Gary pointed out with USA Today, breaches are in the news every day now. So guess what? This is an opportunistic time for every attorney and every IT consulting firm out there to claim themselves as breach experts. The last thing you want to do is go find some counsel who's saying, oh, I handle lots of breaches, I'm a breach expert, I know these laws inside and out. I told you earlier, I'm not counsel, but I can cite any of these privacy laws just like any privacy attorney can. That's not what you want. You want someone who really has an experience at handling these events, not just 10 or 20, but literally hundreds and thousands of them, because all those pitfalls are only going to come with experience. And so be mindful of that. There's a lot of counsels out there and IT firms that are going to claim themselves as breach investigation experts and the like, and you want to get past, you want to filter past all of that. And that's one of the benefits Beazley has done. We've already been vetting out all of these firms out there to make sure these are the folks that really have the right experience under their belts. The other point, just to point out that Max mentioned, is the claims group. So for most insurance carriers, as you know, when something comes up that triggers your policy, you get introduced to the claims folks. Well, Beazley has a little bit of a different opinion. Claims should not be helping you the moment you identify in that phase one that there's something wrong. Why? Because as I said earlier, at that point in time, no one sued you, there's no regulator knocking on your door, so why on earth are you dealing with claims at your carrier? Claims should only be involved if someone is suing you. And so Beazley came up with the opinion that to avoid that potential conflict, we want to have a separate siloed team, separate from claims, that's still in their own right, by trade, they're privacy attorneys, they're experts at breach management. That's who you should be your first call. So I know Gary doesn't like Ghostbusters, but who you're going to call, you don't want to call claims, you want to call that other team because that other team has your interests in mind. Because anyone here that's risk managers clearly know that the claims folks at any insurance carrier, their vested interest is to the carrier, not you. It's just the nature of it. So right now, you don't need someone who's looking out for themselves, you need someone who's looking out for your interests. And that's why we have that separate siloed team that becomes that so-called go-to contact.
Thank you. So part of it, why don't I give some numbers? I'm an underwriter. People like to ask underwriters, what are the real numbers? What are you seeing? I can tell you that one of our common insureds of Michael and us at Beazley just experienced a breach of about 1 million plus people. We'll leave it kind of 1.5 million people, put it at that round number. So the component in here, notification, credit monitoring, call center, forensics. So let's just go through the notification and the call center, because these numbers, I think, are what are actually staggering and will help you understand the kind of financial impact that we're talking about. So they had to notify 1.5 million people, call it like that. Well, what's the little thing that we all forget about when we need to send out a piece of mail? Crap, I got to get a stamp. Anyone have one? Stamps, postage, $600,000. It's just pure math. At this point, stamps are not cheap, and you don't get a discount off the back of the government, I can tell you that right now. Call center. The call center costs almost $750,000 to operate for those 1.5 million people that were affected. $750,000 shocked a lot of people in London, I can tell you. Didn't really shock us after we looked at the details of how many people were phoning in, 3,000 a week, et cetera. And the fact that you pay for what you get in that world in terms of having dedicated people or having people staffed after hours. Those two numbers I thought were worth sharing because they're the two numbers that were most shocking, actually, when I was out with one of Michael's colleagues, and we were speaking about this. So I just thought it'd be fair to share that. Credit monitoring, identity monitoring, what does that cost? Well, they're varying costs. The costs out on the street I've seen people come back and say it's $50 to $100 to be able to offer a year of credit monitoring. It's probably ridiculous. They're probably raking you over the coals because your house is on fire and you need a solution. It should cost a lot less. But I have heard of those situations where that's going on. And I can tell you this, at that point too, they don't just ask you to pay when people call in to redeem the credit monitoring or the identity monitoring. They will ask you to pay up front just to put out the codes to offer it. Not so much fun when you're having to go to your finance team to ask them to cut a check that large that quickly. So what else is making it different? I was talking a little bit about Alex's background earlier. So pre-breach response education and services, the dedicated service team, the vendors that we talked about. Basically, I hope that what you would see is as we go through this slide, looking at the fact that we maintain web portals to help provide you loss control information. I can tell you that our competitors do something very similar. We think that we're doing something that's completely unique because we have complete control over what we're doing. Again, it's back to that whole process of trying to constantly reinvent and being on the cutting edge. And then you get people like Alex, and you get people like Catherine Keefe. So Catherine is we took her away from heading up the healthcare practice at a good-sized law firm. She's based in Philadelphia, where she was working with her healthcare clients on regulatory matters, which also included privacy breach notification and managing breaches itself. And brought her in-house because we didn't, again, like Alex is not an attorney, he's not a recovering attorney either. Catherine is, and Catherine's job is to provide just that general counsel and guidance along the way to make sure that our clients are in a good position as they proceed through the breach process. Within each of those worlds, so you think pre-breach and post-breach, or pre-incident, post-incident, we're constantly trying to evolve and develop those areas. All the way down to, are you running a tabletop exercise? That's something that you should be thinking about doing, not letting that incident response plan that Alex was speaking about sit on the shelf and get dusty, as you mentioned. You mentioned tabletops. Well, part of what we're trying to do is to provide rubrics to help our insureds understand how to run it, what they should be thinking about, where, again, the insurance community can be leveraged, whether it's us or someone else. And think that there's really a good future here. This cottage industry is still growing. With that, I am going to move on to questions because I think we're probably ready for it. But that's just the quick background on who we are and what makes us different. I want to pick up on one more note before we do it. Now my thoughts coming together on what Michael mentioned, and that we will underwrite things, underwrite to your needs. And so part of that goes back to thinking about, we were speaking earlier about immunity issues. I have many insureds who are actually states or state-owned entities who have good immunities in place that they're prepared to rely on with respect to buying liability insurance. So what do? We create a bespoke policy. Bespoke is a London word that I've picked up. we create a unique policy that aims to solve the needs of that client. So that client did not want to buy insurance that was liability because as soon as it exceeded their tort liability, it increased their tort liability. So they have $100,000 of call it $100,000 of immunity. If they bought $1 million, all of a sudden their liability goes from $100,000 to $1 million. And what if the insurance isn't there? Well, then gosh, they're on the hook for that rather than being on the hook for only $100,000. It's kind of interesting issues like that. And so that doesn't just exist within the state-owned entities. That could exist within your own world in the private community in terms of what you do and don't want to transfer risk on. So with that, I think we should move to questions.
The number for the call center was a large number. How is that staffed, or are there any hot sites that you can access that are a pre-positioned call center?
So our call centers, I'm going to start this and I'm going to let Alex finish it because Alex has been in the weeds with the call centers more frequently than I have. But our call centers are generally the same organizations that do the notification. And you want that to be the case, because when you're notifying people, you're getting bounce backs. Think about the bounce backs that you get with emails. You get the return to sender because the person doesn't live here anymore, et cetera, couldn't be forwarded. You have to make a due diligence effort in two ways following that. You have to be able to, one, document that you made a good faith effort to reach that person. Two, that you made a good faith effort to figure out where they now live and then reach that person and document it. You also want your call center, and so that's some of the complexity that's going on with the notification. You want the notification in the call centers to be aligned for another reason. You're notifying 1.5 million people. If you notify them all on exactly the same day, and their tendencies of calling in at the same time are true, you're never going to have a call center that's big enough to be able to handle the large number of people calling in. Say that the number of people that call in is 10%, that's 150,000 people. I don't know of a call center that will be able to handle that volume. Most call centers can only handle about 3,000 to 5,000 a day, and that's if you really, really, really push them. So what you want to do is you want to send out your notices in waves. You want to send out your notices, and you want your call center to be staffed in an appropriate manner to be able to handle it. So that's who we work with. In terms of what they do, we make sure that the call centers that are staffed, again, at the notification firms typically, they're working off of your scripts. Alex was talking about earlier, making sure that whoever is answering the phone is not going to say something that's untoward, that they're saying things that are consistent. So we make sure that they're operating off of our insured scripts. They're also operating off of our insured's escalation procedures. Say an insured, and you have different thresholds, because there's some insureds that want to be involved. As soon as someone says, gosh, you know what, I'm really angry. Okay, that's a trigger. We're going to kick it back to the GC, to the GC's office. There are others who say, you know what, we don't want to talk to anybody. We'll give you answers all the way through. Either way is fine. There's probably a happy medium. But that's our general approach around the call center, and it does cost a lot of money. And so what I don't know in the details of the situation that I just gave you that $750,000 number on is how many of those conversations they wanted to retain, whether that meant that they needed to hire more people who were dedicated to this breach alone versus managing different calls that were coming in based off of different scripts. And that, of course, costs more money. Anything to add there, Alex?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors you have to think about when you're going to consider using a call center. Other factors are you want to make sure that they're a U.S.-based call center. Hate to say it this way, this is not the time to send callers overseas. So you don't want to have someone who's already incensed enough to get a notice that you've lost their data, now having to speak to someone over in India or over in Asia and the like. You want it to be U.S.-based, particularly because you're notifying them that you've now breached their private information. So in their mind, if they're speaking to someone overseas, they're just adding insult to injury here. Why am I now speaking about my sensitive data with someone outside the U.S.? So you want to make sure you have a U.S.-based call center. This is also not the time for your typical call centers. There's call centers that are there to do polls and surveys and things like that. They're good for that, and I'm not discrediting them. But this is a true crisis matter. You want to have someone who's seasoned with dealing with extremely incensed individuals and individuals that are very concerned about their information being compromised. So there are specialized call centers that are dealing with crisis matters, and those are the folks you also want to use. And then you also have to recognize not every event is going to have everyone that knows English. So you need localization expertise. You need to have the ability to address. I have had breaches where the concentration of people affected only speak French or only speak Spanish. So lo and behold, you want to have localization expertise, as it's called, to handle that kind of influx of concentration if ever it's necessary. So these are the factors we already think about every time one of these events come in, is we're already thinking about, okay, what's the appropriate call center structure? As Max appropriately pointed out, escalation procedures are so critical. You know with every event, you're going to get some people that are going to say, by gosh, I want to talk to your CEO right now. I'm so upset with what you did. How do we address that? We have to have some escalation protocol in place to help diffuse that. So those are the things we have to also be mindful of as these types of call centers are put into place. And yes, we want to have FAQ scripts. We want to make sure the right answers are going out the door, and we want to make sure the consistent answers are going out the door.
I'm having some trouble with the perpetrator and the victim. when you have a breach, that doesn't automatically make you guilty, does it?
Yeah. At the end of the day, when these events happen, you as the entity that had the breach, you really don't want to make your objective to be to get the bad guy or gal as much as you want to, because you're so upset that somebody out there has caused this to you. Keep in mind, your goal is to take care of the people affected, make them whole as much as possible, address and give them confidence that this won't happen again, and remediate as best as you can possibly do. Law enforcement at times will be brought into these events, and if they do, that's their objective. They're going to go after the bad guy or gal. That's what makes them successful. What makes you successful is not catching the bad guy or gal. And yes, there are times when I've handled events where I've had my client literally like, I can't wait to wring the neck of the person who did this to us. And I'm like, you know what? I know you want to do that. You know what? I want to do that with you. But let's not focus on that. That's not your objective. Let law enforcement deal with that. But you're going to deal with making these people whole, taking care of any issues that arise from this. It's keeping your team focused on that objective and not focusing on taking that person out to the woodshed and giving them a good reason of what's making you upset right now. That also tends to play into some of this. Those emotional factors are things you want to get out of. So when you talk about how guilty can you be in a court of law or in some jurisdiction or with some regulator, they too probably want to make sure you're taking care of the people affected more than worrying about the bad guy or gal. The only entity really that's worrying about that is law enforcement, and they're not going to be pulled in each and every time.
And I handle everything the way I'm supposed to handle it.
Yes.
How come I have legal liability? How come somebody's going to turn around and look at me and say, you're now legally liable, and I did everything I could do. I didn't create the breach, but I did my best, and I was in compliance. Why am I the bad guy?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, you can still do everything correctly and do it as best as possible from a response perspective. But we got into that position of doing the response because there was some kind of violation of some law that you're an entity under that has jurisdiction over you. So if you have, in fact, breached individuals' information, yes, we can handle it as best as possible, but at the beginning of this, you're still in violation of a regulation or a law. And so that liability can still be imposed to you by a regulator, like an attorney general, for example. So yes, what we're trying to do, though, is put you in that best position to have that regulator say, yeah, you know what, you did lose that data, but you know what, I see you handle this very well. You did the right thing. You had the right culture of compliance. That's a term regulators like. You had the training in place. You know what, you set up the right practices and policies to hopefully prevent a breach. So you know what, I'm not going to come down as hard on you as I probably could. And so you're setting the stage to minimize the blow coming from a regulator by doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, if you breach that information, you and rightfully have violated that law. You violated what the law requires you to protect that data. I don't know, does that answer your question, or perhaps am I still missing it?
I'm pretty close.
Okay.
I'm just looking at it from a practical standpoint. That's a lot of money.
Yes.
And if we don't do anything, reputationally, we could be hurt, and sales go by the wayside.
Absolutely.
All of that.
Absolutely.
To me, you have to consider the balance.
I cannot agree with you more. And part of the essence of the risk management that risk managers face when these events occur is, by me doing this, meaning spending this kind of money, what kind of reputational harm can be reduced by that? And reputational harm sort of is the big question mark when these events occur, because it's a hard liability to quantify into dollars at the end of the day. So what we try to do is, if we can put the right measures in place in a preparedness, meaning before anything ever happens, and then in addition to that, we combine it with handling the event as best as possible, so we can demonstrate in our public messaging, we can demonstrate to a regulator, we're really sorry that this happened, Mr. Madam Regulator, but look what we've done beforehand, we've put in place, and look what we're doing now. We're doing everything possible to help these people. We believe that that is the best recipe to get that minimal impact of the reputational harm. And that's ultimately what we try to do. We try to give you as much up front, and we try to do as much at the time of need to keep that reputational harm down.
I can't echo what Alex just said. Seeing, enough, having seen the claims, having seen the regulators come through, having had dinners and lunches with some of the regulators. One in the UK, the message back from them is all consistent. They really only want to use their fining power, their investigatory power, where they feel like an organization is being reckless with the information. And so demonstrating that you had that culture of compliance is absolutely key. And then, my belief, but it's up to each judge. But what we've seen in case law so far, in terms of looking at the state statutes that might have been violated because an incident occurred, is that if you could show that, one, you went through the process, you determined that nothing really happened with the information, it was just simply lost, and that you had good controls in place ahead of time, it goes away. But it does take some money to go and fight that and to make it go away.
That's a good point. In other words, I'm going to knock on wood. So far, there hasn't been any real good prevailing case on a class action, on big suits regarding privacy or data breaches. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to go and potentially spend 6, even in some cases 7 figures to defend, to get to that prevailing argument on your end. So you may not get the fines or penalties or the judgments that claim, some heavy damages to you, but boy, is that defense expenditure significant and real. It's definitely there. So keep that in mind too. Those defense costs really rack up, and as much as so far case law doesn't demonstrate a lot of cases prevailing significantly, you still have to defend it at the end of the day.
One thing I thought I'd mention is there's some ancillary things happening here in this whole area that evolved recently. University of Maryland had a major breach. Interestingly, the University of Maryland happens to be the consultant to the federal government for cybersecurity, and they had a big breach. Look at the staff at the University of Maryland that had anything to do with managing the cyber area. They're gone. They're all retired. They're all down at Fripp Island. South Carolina, major breach of information of residents, major breach. The governor is having a hard time staying in the governor's office because of that breach. Target, the operating management for Target is being individually sued because of not having in place strong policies and procedures to respond to breaches. So there's a whole new area coming out of this that is not actually incident related, but it's morphing into liabilities and job security, and management is being attacked. Investors are not. Investors have an expectation that their management team is doing the right things so that their bottom line can't be hit. But that's a new growing area.
Absolutely.